Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with Part 12, the Nichiren Sect, from the Adepts in the Eastern Esoteric Tradition by Manly Palmer Hall, Part 2, the Arhats of Buddhism. The Nichiren Sect. The Japanese Buddhist saint and reformer who took the name Nichiren was born the son of a humble fisherman on the 30th day of March, AD 1222. From childhood, he possessed a serious and mystical turn of mind, and his later doctrine was strongly influenced by his early contemplation of the sun and the sea. To him, the glorious orb of day was an eternal symbol of the universal light of truth. The perfect religion must be like the sun, shining into the hearts of all men, bringing with its warmth the blessings of physical security, mental extension, and absolute peace of consciousness. The great ocean also had its message for this strange, sensitive boy. Here was the tideless sea of the doctrine, deep as the wisdom of the ages, vast as Buddha's conception of the cosmic plan, and as mysterious as the workings of the human heart. To meditate upon the sun and the sea was to leave all smallness behind. The little projects of little men were no longer important. The human purpose was absorbed in the universal purpose, and in the end there was only light, peace, and the eternal silence that flowed on forever and ever. From Suzuki's Japanese Buddhism, Portrait of Nichiren, the sanctified Japanese Buddhist teacher, detail from an ancient painting. When Nichiren was 12 years old, he became a disciple of the Shingon sect, serving his novitiate under the venerable abbot Dozembo. The wonderful symbolism and ritualism of the Shingon school were transmuted by the natural beauty of the boy's character into a pure and holy zeal. So rapid was his progress in Buddhist philosophy that he was ordained to the priesthood when only 16 years old. It was at this time that he selected a religious name, Nichiren, signifying lotus of the sun. It is believed that he was influenced in his choice of a name by a story told of his mother. This good woman had a marvelous dream of a white lotus with a radiant sun floating above it just before the boy was conceived. Like most religious leaders, Nichiren came to his people at a time of unusual calamity and distress. Japan, bleeding from the Mongolian invasions, was also torn with internal strife, political and military. Famines, plagues and earthquakes spread terror and desolation. Nichiren, who remained always in his heart a simple peasant, suffered with and for the common man. He determined to find a way of bringing the consolation of Buddhistic mysticism to those who, unlettered and unlearned, must bear the burden of the world's pain. Something very deep and wise within the heart of the young priest told him that truth was not complex, but infinitely simple. It was because of this infinite simplicity that the real way of the Buddha had been concealed from the scholars. Hidden somewhere among the sermons and discourses of Buddha and his immediate arhats, there must be one sutra which embodied the very essence of all the teachings of the Enlightened One. Nichiren knew that he had been born into the material world to discover this sutra king that ruled over all the scriptures. After deep and earnest prayers to Kokuzo Bosatsu, the deity presiding over the wisdom of the doctrine, Nichiren began a pilgrimage to the various shrines, temples, and schools of Japanese Buddhism in search of the Sutra King. His travels lasted for 16 years, and he studied with the principal masters of his time. He also included in his program a thorough examination of Chinese Buddhist philosophy. These studies enabled him to evaluate the numerous sacred books and to compare the merits and demerits of the different teachers and their schools. Nichiren decided finally that the Saddharma Pundarika Sutra, the scripture of the lotus of the perfect truth, was the one which contained the most complete statement of true Buddhism. The saint's words summarize his conviction. One who knows that the lotus of truth is the king of all scriptures knows the truth of religion. Having decided that he had discovered the Sutra King, Nichiren dedicated his life to the study and propagation of the doctrine which it contained. He conceived of 3 esoteric principles which summarized all the essentials of the pure faith. The first of these principles was the holy title. In the early morning of May 17, 1253, Nichiren stood alone on the summit of a mountain, his eyes turned toward the sun as it rose from the deep blue mystery of the ocean. Then for the first time he intoned the formula of the great conviction. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, which means adoration be to the scripture of the lotus of the perfect truth. This is the peculiar mantra of his order, and it has been chanted by his monks and priests and pilgrims for almost 700 years. These are the words of power that have peculiar merit. By the chanting of the sacred title, the human being is united in consciousness with the Sutra King and the Lord Buddha himself. It may be difficult for the average Westerner to understand the importance of what appears to be merely a formula of words, but we must remember that true mysticism is an inner unfoldment almost completely beyond definition in the terms of physical experience. A gesture of the hand, a mantra, a few notes struck upon the lute, the presence of a holy object, or a tree growing alone on some rocky crag, this is enough. Words, explanations, and lengthy arguments add nothing. They only destroy the subtle substance of unworldliness, conjured up by the rapture of the saint. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo is the great conviction. It lies behind the spoken word. It inspires the chant. It draws forth hope and a gentle yearning after truth itself. It fulfills the wonderful workings of the law for those who speak it belongs to it, share in it, and attain it by devotion alone. The ministry of Nichiren was burdened with all the privations and persecutions usually associated with the career of a religious leader. In 1261, he was banished by his political enemies, but used the opportunity to preach in the place of his exile. After he was pardoned in 1263, an attempt was made to assassinate him, and later in 1271 he was sentenced to death by beheading. He escaped death by a miracle, but continued to live in extreme peril and was exiled a second time to the solitary island of Sado, in the northern sea of Japan, where he suffered intensely from cold and starvation. He remained nearly 3 years at Sado, and was then permitted to return home. The closing years of his life were spent in the forest solitudes of Minobu, where he dwelt in a dilapidated hut, 6 feet square in a remote mountain fastness. Weakened by more than 30 years of struggle and poverty, Nichiren entered the nirvana on November 14, 1282. He passed out of this life surrounded by his chanting disciples and in a state of perfect internal and external calmness. The following quotation from the works of Nichiren summarizes his convictions. Finally, let the celestial beings withdraw their protection. Let all perils come upon me. Even so will I dedicate my life to this cause. Be it in weal, be it in woe, to desert the lotus of truth means to fall to the hells. I will be firm in my great vow. Let me face all manner of threats and temptations. Should one say to me, thou mightest ascend the throne of Japan if thou wouldst abandon the scripture and expect future bliss through belief in the meditation on Amita? Or thy parents shall suffer capital punishment unless thou utterest the name of the Buddha Amita, etc. Such temptations I shall meet unshaken and shall never be allured by them unless my principles be shattered by a sage's refutation. Any other perils shall be the dust before a storm. I will be the pillar of Japan. I will be the eyes of Japan. I will be the great vessel of Japan. Inviolable shall remain these oaths. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.